The crash of breaking glass echoed through the farmhouse as Abigail Gardner flinched, her trembling hands clutching the remaining shards of her mother's cherished china teapot. Montana Territory, 1882, was unforgiving to most, but for 20-year-old Abigail, it was doubly so under the critical gaze of her stepfather. "Useless girl. Can't even carry a simple teapot without destroying it," Howard Gardner bellowed, his face flushing crimson beneath his salt and pepper beard. "Just like your mother, clumsy and worthless." Abigail's throat tightened as she knelt to gather the fragments. Her mother had passed 3 winters ago, leaving her alone with a man who had never wanted her. Only the memory of her mother's gentle hands kept her from fleeing into the harsh wilderness beyond their homestead. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though experience had taught her apologies meant nothing to Howard. "Sorry doesn't mend china or put food on the table," he spat. "Your sisters contribute. Why can't you?" Her stepsisters, Beatrice and Clara, watched from the doorway, their matching smirks barely concealed behind lace handkerchiefs. At 23 and 22, they had mastered the art of pleasing their father while ensuring Abigail remained firmly at the bottom of the family hierarchy. "Perhaps she could tend the chickens," Beatrice suggested, her voice dripping with false kindness. "Even Abigail couldn't ruin something as simple as that," Howard nodded curtly. "The chickens, then, and don't come back to the house until every egg is collected. We have guests coming tonight." Abigail knew what that meant. Another potential suitor for one of her stepsisters, while she would be banished to the kitchen or her attic bedroom. She gathered the last of the porcelain pieces and dumped them into the waste bin before heading outside, grateful for the excuse to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the house. The chicken coop stood at the far end of the property, a ramshackle structure that, like Abigail, had seen better days. She entered the small enclosure, basket in hand, and began her mundane task. "At least you don't judge me," she murmured to a plump Rhode Island red who watched her with curious eyes. The chicken clucked sympathetically, as if understanding her plight. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew her attention. Visitors were rare on their remote homestead outside of Pine Creek, especially unannounced ones. Abigail peered through the slats of the coop, curiosity momentarily overriding her misery. A tall figure on horseback appeared at the edge of their property. Even from this distance, Abigail could tell he sat his horse with the easy confidence of someone born to the saddle. The stranger dismounted in one fluid motion, revealing broad shoulders and the unmistakable silhouette of a cowboy's hat against the afternoon sun. Abigail watched as Howard emerged from the house, chest puffed with the self-importance he always displayed to outsiders. Their conversation carried on the breeze, fragments reaching her ears. Cattle drive, water rights, staying in town. She should return to her task, she knew, but something about the stranger held her attention. Unlike the local farmers or merchants who occasionally visited, this man carried himself with quiet dignity. Even in conversation with Howard, who towered over most men, the cowboy stood his ground, neither intimidated nor aggressive. After several minutes, Howard gestured toward the barn, and the cowboy led his horse in that direction. To Abigail's horror, her stepfather then pointed directly at the chicken coop. The stranger nodded and began walking her way. Panic seized her. She looked down at her worn dress, stained with dirt and chicken feathers. She attempted to smooth her auburn hair, which had long since escaped its pins, but it was hopeless. The cowboy would find her looking every bit the useless drudge her family claimed her to be. She busied herself with the eggs, hoping he might simply pass by, but the creak of the coop door dashed that hope. "Pardon me, miss," came a deep voice, warm as summer honey and tinged with a southern drawl. Abigail turned slowly, eggs clutched protectively to her chest, and found herself looking into the kindest pair of blue eyes she had ever seen. The cowboy stood in the doorway, his tall frame blocking the sunlight. He removed his hat, revealing thick waves of wheat blonde hair. Your father said I might find water for my horse here, he said. Stepfather, she corrected automatically, then blushed at her boldness. A smile touched his lips. My apologies. He extended a hand. Wade Lawson, madam, I'm passing through with a cattle drive headed to Billings. Abigail Gardner, she replied, awkwardly shifting her basket to free one hand. His palm was warm and calloused against hers, the brief contact sending an unexpected flutter through her chest. Those are mighty fine-looking eggs, Miss Gardner, he observed, nodding toward her basket. She glanced down, certain he was mocking her, but his expression held nothing but genuine interest. The water trough is just behind the coop, she said, gesturing vaguely. Your horse is welcome to it. Much obliged. Wade settled his hat back on his head but made no move to leave. That's quite a collection you've got there. You must have a way with chickens. Abigail nearly laughed. A way with chickens. Was that supposed to be a compliment? Yet his tone was sincere, with none of the condescension she was accustomed to. They're not particularly demanding company, she replied, surprising herself with the hint of humor in her voice. Wade chuckled, a rich sound that warmed her more than it should have. Fair point, though I've known some ornery roosters in my time. Their conversation was interrupted by Howard's booming voice calling for her. The brief moment of lightness evaporated as Abigail's shoulders tensed. I should go, she said, ducking her head. The water's there for your horse. I hope you have a safe journey to Billings. As she hurried past him, Wade spoke again, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Thank you for your kindness, Miss Gardner. It's a rare thing on the trail, kindness. The word followed her like a ghost as she returned to the house, where Howard was waiting with crossed arms and a scowl that promised nothing good. Dallying with strange men now, are you? He accused, grabbing the egg basket from her hands and inspecting its contents with critical eyes. No, sir. He asked about water for his horse, that's all. Howard snorted. As if a man like that would look twice at you. Get inside and help your sisters prepare for dinner. The Thompsons will be here at 6 and everything must be perfect. Their son is quite taken with Beatrice. The evening passed in a blur of work and invisibility. Abigail cooked and served while her stepsisters charmed the guests, their laughter floating from the dining room like music from another world. She retreated to the kitchen, scrubbing pots with vigorous determination, trying to ignore the ache that had become her constant companion. Later, as she climbed the narrow stairs to her attic room, exhaustion weighed her down like wet wool. She lit her small lamp and moved to the window, her one luxury being this view of the Montana sky, vast and dotted with stars that seemed close enough to touch. Movement below caught her eye. A figure led a horse from their barn, the Cowboy, Wade, preparing to return to town for the night. He paused, looking up at the house, and for one breathless moment, Abigail thought he might have seen her silhouette in the window. Then he mounted his horse and rode away, just another traveler passing through her life. She should not have been disappointed. Men like Wade Lawson didn't notice girls like her girls whose own families found them wanting. Yet as she prepared for bed, his words echoed in her mind. Thank you for your kindness. Such a simple thing to be thanked, to be seen, but to Abigail, it felt like water in the desert. Morning came too soon, bringing with it the usual litany of chores and criticisms. By midday, Abigail's hands were raw from washing laundry and her back ached from hauling water. She was hanging sheets on the line when she spotted a now familiar figure approaching on horseback. Wade Lawson rode up to the fence line, leading a second horse, a dappled gray mare with a white blaze down her face. He dismounted and tipped his hat as Abigail reluctantly approached. Good afternoon, Miss Gardner, he greeted her, his smile as warm as yesterday's. I hope I'm not intruding. Mr. Lawson, she acknowledged, conscious of her work-worn appearance. I thought you'd be on your way to Billings by now. The drive's moving slow, good grazing along the way. He patted the neck of the gray mare. This is Birdie, she's gentle as they come but full of spirit. Abigail kept her distance, uncertain why he was telling her this. She's beautiful. She's yours if you'd like her. Her head snapped up, sure she'd misheard. I beg your pardon, Wade's expression remained earnest. I won this mare in a card game in Cheyenne. She's too fine for trail work, and I thought perhaps you might appreciate her company. You're giving me a horse. Abigail couldn't keep the disbelief from her voice. Consider it a trade for your hospitality, he said, though they both knew a sip of water hardly warranted such compensation. Before she could respond, Howard emerged from the barn, his suspicious gaze moving between them. "What's this about?" he demanded, approaching with heavy footsteps. Wade straightened, meeting Howard's gaze directly. "Mr. Gardner, I was just offering your stepdaughter this mare. She's surplus to my needs and would do well on a homestead like yours." Howard's eyes narrowed as he evaluated the horse, clearly calculating its worth. "A gift, you say, for Miss Gardner specifically," Wade clarified, his tone pleasant but firm. A shrewd look crossed Howard's face. "Well now, that's generous. But Abigail has no use for a horse. My daughter Beatrice, on the other hand, is an accomplished rider." Abigail's heart sank. Of course Howard would redirect this unexpected bounty to Beatrice, as he did with anything of value that came Abigail's way. But Wade wasn't swayed. "With respect, sir, I've offered the horse to Miss Abigail. If she declines, I'll simply take Birdie with me when I leave." Howard's face darkened. "See here, Lawson, I accept," Abigail interrupted, surprising herself as much as the men. "Thank you, Mr. Lawson. I would be honored to give Birdie a home." Wade's smile was quick and genuine, while Howard's expression soured like milk left in the sun. For once, Abigail didn't shrink under her stepfather's glare. Her mare nickered softly, as if approving the arrangement. "You'll need to earn her keep," Howard growled at Abigail. "That means extra chores to pay for her feed." "Yes, sir," she agreed readily. 100 extra chores would be worth it for the freedom a horse could provide. Howard stomped back to the barn, muttering about ungrateful stepchildren and interfering strangers. Once he was out of earshot, Abigail approached the mare cautiously, extending a hand to let her sniff. "Why?" she asked Wade quietly, stroking Birdie's velvety muzzle. He considered her question, blue eyes thoughtful beneath the brim of his hat. "Sometimes a person just needs something that's truly theirs," he said finally. "Something no one can take away." The simple truth of his words struck her like a physical blow. How had this man, a stranger passing through, seen what she needed when her own family never had? "I don't know how to thank you," she admitted. "No need for thanks, just treat her well." Wade handed her Birdie's reins. "She likes apples and can't resist a good ear scratch." Their hands brushed during the exchange, and Abigail felt that same inexplicable flutter. She attributed it to excitement over the horse, nothing more. A man like Wade was surely just being kind to a pitiful girl, the sort of kindness one might show to a stray dog or a lost child. "I should get back," he said, mounting his own horse. "The herd won't drive itself. How long will you be in Pine Creek?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. "Another 2 days, maybe 3, depending on how the crossing at Miller's Creek goes." He adjusted his hat against the afternoon sun. "Perhaps I'll see you again before we head north." "Perhaps," she echoed, though she knew Howard would ensure that didn't happen. After Wade rode away, Abigail led Birdie to the small paddock adjacent to the barn. The mare followed easily, nuzzling Abigail's shoulder as if they were already old friends. For the first time in years, Abigail felt a spark of something dangerous ignite within her chest hope. That evening, Howard made it clear that while Abigail could keep the horse, she would pay for the privilege with increased labor. Her stepsisters expressed outrage that the useless one had received such a gift, questioning what she could have done to earn a cowboy's favor. Their insinuations made Abigail's cheeks burn, but she endured their taunts silently, thoughts of Birdie sustaining her. The next morning, she rose before dawn to complete her usual chores, then slipped out to spend time with her new companion. Birdie greeted her with a soft whicker that felt like a welcome. Abigail brushed the mare's coat until it gleamed in the early light, talking softly all the while. "I've never had anything so beautiful," she confessed to the horse. "I don't know why he chose me, but I'm grateful he did." Animals know good people when they meet them, came a voice from behind her. Abigail whirled to find Wade leaning against the paddock fence, watching her with those clear blue eyes. She hadn't heard him approach, too absorbed in her communion with Birdie. Mr. Lawson. I didn't expect to see you again so soon, he smiled. Had some business with the general store in town, thought I'd check on you and Birdie on my way back to camp. He nodded approvingly at the mare's gleaming coat. She looks happy. She's wonderful, Abigail said, unable to contain her delight. I've never had a horse before. Never, Wade raised an eyebrow. On a homestead like this, she shrugged. My stepsisters have horses I've always been needed elsewhere. Understanding dawned in his eyes, but he offered no pity, for which she was grateful. Instead, he said, would you like to learn to ride her properly? Hope surged again, but reality quickly dampened it. I have chores. If my stepfather found out, I spoke with him on my way in, Wade said casually. Mentioned I'd like to make sure the mare was settling in, perhaps show you how to handle her. He seemed amenable. Abigail blinked in surprise. He agreed to that. I might have mentioned that my boss is looking to buy beef cattle for the ranch back in Wyoming. Wade's eyes twinkled. Your stepfather became quite accommodating after that. A small laugh escaped her, the sound rusty from disuse. You're crafty, Mr. Lawson. Wade, he corrected gently. And I prefer to think of it as practical. Now, would you like that riding lesson? For the next hour, Wade showed her how to saddle Birdie properly, how to mount and sit, how to use the reins and her legs to communicate with the horse. Abigail was a quick study, her natural grace emerging as she gained confidence. By the time they finished, she was riding in small circles around the paddock, a smile brightening her face. You're a natural, Wade called as she guided Birdie into a smooth stop beside him. Like you were born to it. Abigail dismounted, flushed with exhilaration and an unfamiliar sense of accomplishment. Thank you for teaching me, my pleasure. There was something in his gaze now, an intensity that made her pulse quicken. You have a rare gift, Abigail Gardner, for riding, she asked, puzzled. For joy, he clarified. Most people who have had joy beaten out of them can't find it again so quickly. But you, he gestured to her still smiling face, you've kept it alive somewhere inside you despite everything. His perception unnerved her. How could he see so clearly what she herself had barely recognized? You don't know me, she protested weakly. I'd like to, he replied simply. Before she could process those 3 dangerous words, Howard's voice shattered the moment. Abigail, the kitchen needs attending. She jumped, instinctively moving away from Wade. I have to go, Wade nodded, his expression regretful but understanding. Until tomorrow then. Tomorrow, for your next lesson, he said, as if it were already decided. Same time she should refuse. Getting attached to this wandering cowboy would only lead to heartache when he inevitably left with his cattle drive. But the prospect of another hour like the one they'd just shared was too tempting to resist. Same time, she agreed, then hurried toward the house, aware of Wade's gaze following her retreat. The next morning dawned clear and bright, a perfect Montana spring day. Abigail moved through her chores with unusual speed, driven by anticipation. When she finally made her way to the paddock, Wade was already there, leaning against the fence in casual conversation with Birdie. Good morning, he called, tipping his hat. Ready for your next lesson? Today he led her beyond the paddock into the meadow that stretched behind the homestead. Under his watchful eye, Abigail learned to guide Birdie at different speeds, to turn and stop with increasing confidence. The freedom of movement was intoxicating after years of confinement to house and yard. As they rode side by side, Wade shared stories of his life on the range of cattle drives through thunderstorms, of nights spent beneath star-studded skies, of the camaraderie among cowboys who became like family when home was too distant to return to. Where is your home? Abigail asked as they allowed their horses to rest by a small stream. Wyoming territory near the Bighorn Mountains, Wade replied, his gaze distant. My father has a ranch there, nothing fancy but it's good land with plenty of water. You must miss it, he nodded. I do. But the trail has its own appeal, seeing new country, meeting new people. His eyes found hers. Some people make the journey worthwhile. Abigail looked away, uncomfortable with the warmth his words kindled. Will you return there after Billings? That's the plan. My father's not getting any younger and the ranch needs looking after. He studied her profile. What about you, Abigail? What are your plans? The question startled her. No one had ever asked about her plans or dreams, as if her future were predetermined, an endless succession of days serving others' needs. I don't have any, she admitted. At least none that seem possible. Tell me anyway, he encouraged. The impossible has a way of becoming possible when you speak it aloud. She hesitated, then found herself sharing the secret aspirations she had never voiced. I'd like to have my own place someday. Nothing grand, just a small house with a garden, maybe some chickens. She stroked Birdie's neck. And horses, of course. Somewhere I could make my own decisions, be my own person. Wade listened intently, nodding as if her modest dreams were entirely reasonable. That sounds like a fine life. But it's just a fantasy, she added quickly. Howard would never allow me to leave, and even if he did, I have no money, no skills that would earn me a living. You have more skills than you realize, Wade countered. And as for leaving, you're of age, aren't you? He can't legally keep you here. The thought was so revolutionary that Abigail could barely comprehend it. But where would I go? How would I survive? There are always possibilities for those brave enough to seek them. Wade's voice was gentle but firm. Don't let others define what you're capable of, Abigail. Their conversation was interrupted by the distant ringing of the dinner bell, summoning Abigail back to her duties. They rode back in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the paddock, Wade said, I have to rejoin the drive tomorrow. We're crossing Miller's Creek at dawn. Though she had known this moment was coming, disappointment still struck hard. Then I suppose this is goodbye. It doesn't have to be, he said, dismounting and helping her down from Birdie. His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary. I'll be in Billings for at least a week after the drive arrives. If you wanted to, visit. The unspoken invitation hung between them, tantalizing but impossible. I can't leave the homestead, she reminded him, and Billings is nearly 2 days' ride. With the right horse and the right determination, it's only a day and a half, he countered, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Think about it, that's all I'm asking. That night, Abigail lay awake, Wade's suggestion turning over and over in her mind like a river stone. Leave the homestead. Travel alone to Billings. The very idea was terrifying and yet, for the first time, not entirely unimaginable. What held her here after all? Not love, certainly. Not even duty, really, since nothing she did ever seemed to satisfy Howard or her stepsisters. Just habit and fear, poor reasons to surrender one's entire life. The next morning, Howard announced at breakfast that he and the girls would be attending a social in Pine Creek that evening. Abigail, naturally, would stay behind to mind the homestead. Have dinner ready when we return, he instructed. And see that the fires are banked properly. I won't have you burning the house down with your carelessness. Alone after they departed, Abigail moved through the house like a ghost, touching familiar objects as if seeing them for the first time or the last. In her mother's old trunk, she found a small leather pouch containing the only inheritance her mother had managed to keep from Howard, a gold locket and a few silver dollars saved over many years. By sunset, Abigail had made her decision. She packed a small bundle of clothing, her mother's keepsakes, and what little food she could take without it being noticed. She wrote a brief note explaining that she was leaving of her own free will and would not be returning. Then she saddled Birdie, who seemed to sense the importance of the journey ahead, standing patiently as Abigail secured her meager belongings. As darkness fell, Abigail Gardner rode away from the only home she had ever known, heading north toward Billings and perhaps toward something that had been missing from her life for as long as she could remember: possibility. The journey was harder than she had anticipated. Though spring had arrived, nights in Montana territory remained bitterly cold. Abigail huddled beneath her thin blanket, grateful for Birdie's warmth as they camped beside a small creek. Every unfamiliar sound startled her: the hoot of an owl, the distant howl of wolves, the rustle of wind through new leaves. By the second day, her muscles ached from hours in the saddle, and doubt began to creep in. What if Wade had already left Billings? What if he had never meant his invitation seriously? What if this impulsive act of rebellion led only to greater hardship, but turning back was unthinkable? Even if Wade was gone, even if Billings offered no refuge, she could not return to the suffocation of her stepfather's house. She would find another way, another place. For the first time in her life, Abigail felt the exhilarating terror of controlling her own destiny. Late on the second afternoon, the sprawling outskirts of Billings came into view. The town was larger than Pine Creek, with proper streets and substantial buildings. Abigail guided Birdie toward the center, where she assumed the cattle pens would be located. The stockyards were easy to find, buzzing with activity as several cattle drives had recently arrived. Abigail approached a grizzled older man directing workers near the gate. "Excuse me, sir," she called, summoning her courage. "I'm looking for a cattle drive from Wyoming. The trail boss would be a Mr. Lawson." The man squinted up at her, taking in her travel-worn appearance. "Wade Lawson." "Yeah, they came in yesterday. You'll find most of the boys over at the Cattleman's Hotel, 2 blocks that way." He pointed down the main street. Abigail thanked him and rode on, her heart pounding with mingled hope and anxiety. The Cattleman's Hotel was an imposing 2-story building with a wide porch where several men in cowboy attire lounged in chairs, smoking and talking. She dismounted, securing Birdie to a hitching post, and gathered her courage. As she approached the porch, conversations died down and curious eyes turned her way. "I'm looking for Wade Lawson," she announced, striving to keep her voice steady. A lean cowboy with a drooping mustache grinned. "Wade's inside, miss. Want me to fetch him for you?" "Please," she said, relieved not to have to enter the establishment alone. Moments later, the hotel door swung open and Wade emerged, his expression shifting from curiosity to astonishment when he saw her. "Abigail." He descended the steps in 2 long strides. "What are you doing here?" Now that the moment had arrived, words failed her. "You said, you invited." She stammered, suddenly aware of the audience of cowboys watching with undisguised interest. Understanding dawned in Wade's eyes. He turned to his companions. "Give us some privacy, boys." The men dispersed, though not without a few knowing smirks and whispered comments. Wade led Abigail and Birdie around the corner to a quieter side street. "You came all this way alone?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. She nodded. "I left, for good. I'm not going back." Wade studied her face, taking in the determination beneath her exhaustion. "That took courage. Or desperation," she countered. "Often the same thing from different angles." He reached out, tentatively touching her arm. "Are you all right? Have you eaten, rested?" His concern nearly undid her. After years of indifference, such simple kindness was almost too much to bear. "I'm fine, just tired, and uncertain what happens next." Wade's expression softened. "What do you want to happen next, Abigail?" It was the question she had avoided during her entire journey. What did she want? Not just escape, surely, but the alternative: admitting she had come for him because of him was too vulnerable, too raw. "I don't know," she admitted. "I only knew I couldn't stay there anymore." Wade nodded slowly. "Well, first things first, you need a proper meal and rest. There's a respectable boarding house down the street that takes in women travelers. We'll get you settled there, and then we can talk about what comes next." Relief washed over her. He wasn't sending her away. "Thank you." "No need for thanks between friends," he said, then added more softly, "I'm glad you came, Abigail. More than I can say." The boarding house was run by a widow named Mrs. Peterson, who looked Abigail over with shrewd but kind eyes before agreeing to rent her a room. Wade paid for a week in advance despite Abigail's protests. "Consider it a loan," he insisted, "until you decide your next steps." After a hot meal and the luxury of a proper bath, Abigail felt almost human again. She met Wade the next morning for breakfast in the boarding house's small dining room, where Mrs. Peterson served them eggs and biscuits while maintaining a watchful presence. "I've been thinking about your situation," Wade said after they had eaten. "There are several possibilities if you're interested in hearing them." "Of course," she replied, grateful that he had given the matter thought. "First, Mrs. Peterson mentioned she could use help here at the boarding house, room and board plus a small wage." He took a sip of coffee. "Second, the schoolteacher is looking for an assistant. Can you read and write well?" "Yes, my mother taught me before she passed." "That's another option then." He hesitated before continuing. "Third, you could come to Wyoming." Abigail's breath caught. "Wyoming?" Wade met her gaze steadily. "To my father's ranch. We need a housekeeper, and the position includes separate living quarters, a small cabin near the main house." Her mind raced. A job, independence, a place of her own. It was more than she had dared hope for. "That's very generous, but why would you do this for me?" "Because I see you, Abigail Gardner," he said simply. "Not the person your family claimed you to be, but who you really are: capable, intelligent, kind, the sort of person I'd be proud to have working at our ranch." She sensed there was more he wasn't saying, but she didn't press. The offer itself was miraculous enough. "I would be honored to accept the position." Wade's smile was like sunrise breaking over mountains. "Good, we leave in 5 days, once the paperwork for the cattle sale is complete." The following days passed in a blur of preparation. Abigail purchased sturdy traveling clothes with some of her mother's silver dollars, and Wade introduced her to trail supplies she would need for the journey to Wyoming. They spent evenings planning their route, heads bent together over maps spread on Mrs. Peterson's dining table. In these quiet moments, something shifted between them. Their conversations deepened beyond practical matters to shared confidences. Wade told her about his mother's death when he was 12, how his father had struggled to raise him alone, how the ranch had become their shared purpose and salvation. Abigail spoke of her own mother, of the small kindnesses she had taught Abigail to notice and nurture, even in the harshest circumstances. "She would be proud of you," Wade said one evening as they sat on the boarding house porch, watching the street lamps being lit. "Taking charge of your life this way." "I hope so," Abigail replied softly. "I still can't quite believe I did it." "I can," he said, his voice warm with certainty. "From the moment I saw you in that chicken coop, I knew you had fire in you, just waiting for the right moment to blaze." She laughed. "Is that what attracted your attention? My hidden fire?" The word attracted hung between them, suddenly significant. Wade turned to face her, his expression serious. "Yes," he admitted. "That and 1,000 other things I've discovered since. Your kindness, your resilience. The way you talk to Birdie when you think no one's listening. The way you never complain, even when you have every right to." Abigail's heart thundered in her chest. "Wade, I know it's too soon," he continued quickly. "You've just escaped one situation. I won't rush you into another. The job offer is genuine with no expectations attached, but I want you to know that to me, you're not just a housekeeper or a friend." His hand found hers on the porch railing. "To me, you're everything I never knew I was looking for." The simple honesty of his declaration undid her completely. Tears spilled down her cheeks, not the tears of sorrow she had grown accustomed to, but of a joy so profound it could only express itself this way. "No one has ever seen me the way you do," she whispered. "Then everyone else has been blind," he replied, gently wiping away her tears with his thumb. When they left Billings 5 days later, they rode side by side, Abigail on Birdie and Wade on his chestnut gelding. The journey to Wyoming would take over a week, but Abigail faced it without fear. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would meet them with newfound confidence, and she would not face them alone. The Bighorn Mountains appeared on the horizon after 8 days of travel, their snow-capped peaks gleaming in the late spring sunshine. As they crested a final hill, Wade reined his horse to a stop and gestured to the valley below. "There it is," he said, pride evident in his voice. "Lawson Ranch." Abigail took in the view. A sprawling ranch house surrounded by barns and corrals, herds of cattle grazing on lush pastureland, all nestled against the backdrop of the mountains. And there, just as Wade had described, stood a small cabin near a creek with a garden plot waiting to be planted. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "It's home," Wade replied, watching her face. "It could be yours too in time if you wanted." She turned to him, understanding his meaning perfectly. "I think I'd like that very much." Their arrival caused a stir of activity as ranch hands emerged to greet their boss's son. Wade's father, Thomas Lawson, a tall man with the same wheat-blonde hair now streaked with silver, welcomed them with open arms. "So this is the young lady you wrote about," he said, studying Abigail with kind eyes so like his son's. "Welcome to Lawson Ranch, Miss Gardner." "Thank you, Mr. Lawson," she replied, overwhelmed by the warmth of his greeting. "Call me Thomas," he insisted. "Any woman who can make my son write a 3-page letter full of nothing but praise deserves to be on a first-name basis with the family." Wade groaned in embarrassment, but Abigail's heart soared. "I'll try to live up to his generous assessment." "Just be yourself," Thomas advised. That seems to be more than enough for Wade. The days that followed established a new rhythm to Abigail's life. She settled into the cabin, making it her own with small touches: wildflowers in jars, curtains sewn from fabric purchased in the nearby town, a vegetable garden sprouting behind the house. She took over management of the ranch household, finding satisfaction in work that was appreciated rather than expected. Wade courted her properly, with Thomas's enthusiastic blessing. They rode together in the evenings, exploring the ranch's boundaries. On Sundays, he took her to the small church in town, proudly introducing her to neighbors and friends. 3 months after her arrival, on a perfect summer evening, Wade proposed by the creek that ran behind her cabin, going down on one knee in the traditional way. "I know it hasn't been long," he acknowledged, "but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you, Abigail Gardner. Will you marry me?" Abigail looked at the man before her, this man who had seen her value when her own family had dismissed her, who had offered her not just escape but a future filled with possibility and respect. "Yes," she said simply. "With all my heart, yes." They married in the fall, when the mountains blazed with autumn colors. The small church overflowed with well-wishers from the ranch and surrounding homesteads. Abigail wore a gown of ivory satin, with her mother's locket around her neck and wildflowers in her hair. As Wade slipped a gold band onto her finger, he whispered words meant only for her. "You are everything to me, Abigail, everything." And in that moment, the girl once called useless knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true worth not in others' estimation, but in her own courage to seek a different life, and in the love of a man who had recognized her value from the very beginning. 5 years later, Abigail stood on the porch of the main ranch house, now her home since Thomas had moved to the cabin to give the younger Lawsons more space. She watched as Wade taught their 4-year-old daughter, Emma, to ride her first pony, while their 2-year-old son, James, toddled after them, determined not to be left behind. "Mama, look," Emma called, sitting proudly atop the gentle Shetland. "I'm riding like you and Papa." "Beautiful sweetheart," Abigail called back, her heart full to bursting. Wade caught her eye across the yard, his smile as warm and genuine as the day they'd met. In that smile was a world of shared memories, challenges overcome, and a love that had only deepened with time. From useless to everything, the journey had been long, but every step had led her here, to this family, this home, this life that was more beautiful than any dream she had dared to dream in that chicken coop so many years ago.